Morning. This is Monday, August 5th, 1991, in Crawfordsville, Indiana, at the Lane Place. We've had an extremely dry summer, and this morning we're getting a few sprinkles of rain on this fine Monday morning. We hope it continues, although the corn this year is severely damaged, and the beans are not looking very good either. We're here at the Lane Place this morning to have another taping of a World War II veteran who served in the Pacific. We've had quite a few of these, getting our idea for these types of interviews from Public Broadcasting's program back a few months ago when they showed veterans of the Civil War. And Bob Wernley, a retired attorney and a former director of the Montgomery County Historical Society, got the idea we should be doing this for our World War II veterans who are still with us. So that is the basis for this. My name is Clare Chamberlain. I live here in Crawfordsville, Indiana. I lived here for about 25 years, associated with the American Legion and with the VFW. Our cameraman is Ed Miller from the American Legion and the VFW, who's done our taping. The Lane Place is under the management of Mike Hall, who lives in Illinois but now works here at the Lane Place to do the executive directing. Like I said, this is a series of tapes about veterans of World War II in various theaters. This morning we have with us a gentleman we're going to talk to that was in the Army, and so I'll turn to him. And sir, would you give us your name?
I'm Don Backe. I've lived in Crawfordsville for 12 years. Very happy here. And I have been just recently retired. I've been in insurance all my life. I was born in Crown Point, Indiana, and later moved to Hammond.
Where did you go to high school?
I went to high school at Catholic Central High School, now known as Noel, and they won a number of football tournaments over the years. It's a small school, but very adequate.
Mm-hmm. Who were your parents?
My parents were Frank and Teresa Backe. Their folks had been farmers in Lake County, dairy farmers, and I believe that all their brothers and sisters stayed into farming, except my father, who went into business about 1919. And so when I came along and reached the right age, I joined him in the business.
Do you have brothers or sisters?
Yes, I have two brothers, one in Calumet City, Illinois, and one in Denver, Colorado.
What are their names?
Gerald or Jerry in Cal City, and Gus in Denver. My brother in Denver is somewhat younger, is in banking. My brother in Calumet City had been in one of the manufacturing plants in the Calumet area most of his life.
I will come back to some more of your family later on in the interview, Don. How did you happen to become involved in the military?
Well, in the registration, as I recall, was about October of 1940, and then you were drafted by number, selective service, and I was picked to join in June 4th of 1941. I anticipated being in a year, and I had not been militarily inclined, I would say. However, I felt very fortunate in coming through in good shape and try to remember the best experiences.
Mm-hmm. What, you were drafted then?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
In the summer of 41.
That's right.
Okay, where did you report to?
I reported to Fort Bend in Indianapolis to be processed and get the uniform and dog tags, and then was sent to Camp Wallace near Houston, Texas.
What'd you do there?
There I had basic training in anti-aircraft artillery. At that time, anti-aircraft was part of Coast Guard artillery, so it was anti-aircraft in parentheses Coast Guard. And so evidently anti-aircraft was developed between the two wars. I found that the people in Houston, particularly the civilians, were very friendly toward the GIs, and whenever we had a chance on weekends, we went in and they entertained us, put on dances and other things for people who felt homesick.
Well, that was nice. How long were you there?
I was there about 3 months, and coincidentally, in regard to the civilians, at that time they were talking aluminum a lot. People were saving aluminum to be used in building planes, and so every lady you knew of was turning in pots and pans to some central area to be used otherwise. That was my first experience in recycling, I would say.
Right, and that's been some 50 years ago.
That's right.
Of course, this is the 50th anniversary of Pearl Harbor.
Yes, right. I got into the Army just 50 years and 2 months ago.
Yeah, isn't that something? Where did you go from Houston, Texas, or?
There I reported to Camp Stewart, Georgia, somewhere in central Georgia, and then we went on maneuvers in North and South Carolina. It was good war practice, I suppose. I understand, and I'm not sure though, that General Eisenhower was involved in that. At that time, he was probably a Major General. And but yeah, it was interesting living in the field and so on. Fortunately, it was from about September to November, and the weather was just fine. And it was another one of those experiences where you live on the ground in pup tents and so on. But it was rather exhilarating for a city boy.
I would think so. Did you heard that Dwight Eisenhower was there, or did you know? I was told that later. I see.
I'm not entirely certain. I would like to research that.
That'd be interesting.
After that, we came back to our base camp, Stewart, in Georgia, on about December 1st, 41. And so, after being in for almost 6 months, we were set for a Christmas furlough. However, something happened on December 7th, and we never got the Christmas furlough.
What were you doing when you heard that the Japs had struck Pearl Harbor?
Well, it was, I believe it was evening in the United States, and just playing basketball, kind of anticipating things, and somebody came and told us they had just heard something on the radio that might change our lives to a certain extent. So we waited for further orders. Of course, we did hear Roosevelt talk the following day, and declaring war on Japan. And so then we got orders to move on to another spot.
Where did you go from there?
We were sent to the Martin Aircraft plant at Baltimore. It was anticipated that the Nazis would be bombing eastern United States and so on, and certainly they would bomb aircraft plants, and we stationed our artillery around that place, and we had it very fine there. We were able to live in the basement of the aircraft plant in very plush quarters, and we got ID tags, Martin Bomber, and so on. And however, we were there until about January 10th or 12th, and of course they didn't bomb the United States. And then we had orders to move on to another place. Incidentally, when we were at Camp Stewart, Georgia, I should have mentioned we were assigned to the 70th Anti-Aircraft Artillery. And, the insignia is kind of a red shield. It has a dragon in the sky surrounded by searchlights being struck by an arrow, and evidently that was to symbolize the anti-aircraft artillery striking down an enemy plane. I like the symbolism.
Right. No, that's interesting. What did you do with these anti-aircraft artillery batteries?
Well, in a situation, basically they were to protect something or some people. Around the Martin plant, we were set up to, of course, shoot any planes that might be over, which were indicated to be enemy planes. Or we were sometimes told, because at that time, of course, you couldn't search out the planes. There was no device, no radar device for searching them out, and so the artillery was dumb. So you put up a barrage to keep the planes up, and so they would be less accurate. Just fill the sky with bombs and smoke. The artillery pieces, or I should say the bombs themselves would explode at a certain point, without contact. And the shrapnel would damage the planes, but they did not need contact. But you fill the sky with a barrage like that, and the planes would fly higher, and the plane probably would fly higher and be less accurate. Yeah. So it's a matter of guessing and hoping.
Yeah. Did you fire the weapons?
No. My entire time after basic training was involved in clerical work, administrative and so on. So I may have fired some in training, and that was about it. It's often been said, I suppose, that the American Army depended or used the typewriter a great deal, and so we were, somebody had to keep the records and record of casualties and movements and so on.
Sure.
And I was involved in that.
Okay, Martin Bomber Plant. How long were you there?
I was there for about 2 months, and then we had orders to move to Fort Dix, New Jersey, for about a week or so, and then we would be shipped out to an unknown destination abroad. We thought perhaps it might be Iceland, where there were some American troops, or the Mediterranean. We had no idea, so we just waited to see. We were on this ship called the Comes Home. It was a Swedish luxury liner, which the American Army requisitioned and converted it into a transport. And they were able to shove 6,000 troops into that ship, and there were several other ships along in the convoy and protected by destroyers and so on. So the first thing we noticed was that we headed south, kept going south and southward, and eventually got into the Caribbean. And so it was interesting. It was like a cruise under other circumstances. You lean over the rail and watch the flying fish and porpoises and so on, and watch the stars at night. I had always been interested in astronomy and knew the constellations and planets and so on. And as we moved southward, however, naturally the sky changed. Then several weeks later, we got to the Panama Canal. So we realized that we were headed for the Pacific by way of New York. And so we had a long ride. Took about 30 days. And for amusement and so on, they got the phones to sing and to shine their shoes again and do all kinds of things to sort of keep the morale up because we had no idea where we were going. They were thinking a little bit about the Philippines, but we weren't well enough organized yet, that is the various regiments and so on. And eventually, after 30 days, sometime in February of '42, we came to Melbourne, Australia. Melbourne was a very interesting city. It has a beautiful harbor. The houses on the side of a hill, the two hills approaching the bay were pastel-colored, green, yellow, and so on. And they all had red tile roofs, and they looked just beautiful. You could gaze out there a mile or two.
On your trip to Melbourne, after you got out into the Pacific, did you have any alerts that enemy aircraft or submarines might be in the area? Or
yes, we did. We had several alerts, mostly in regard to submarines. And we saw the destroyers and cruisers drop several depth charges, and some of them made quite a splash in the water as it exploded. I don't know of any aircraft warnings, but the convoy took a zigzag course, which I suppose was usual because in order to avoid submarines, the torpedoes, if they started on a straight line, if you zigzagged it up, you would probably avoid some.
It helped.
None of our ships in this convoy of about 30 or 40, including the Navy, was hit. As far as I know.
Did you, aboard that ship that you said had 6,000 men on it, how was the chow?
Well, the chow was all right for a week or so, and then it started getting a little bad. Of course, you had no capacity for carrying too much water, so you bathed in salt water, and they had a special type soap for that. And they were fancy. As I say, this was a luxury liner, so you'd use a fancy bathtub. I don't know whether they're in showers, but salt water gets a little old after a month.
Yes, I know.
But it was, at one time in the Pacific, not the boiler room, but the engine room caught fire.
Oh my.
And they didn't want to stop and turn around. It burned for about a day, and evidently they controlled it and resumed, and we got to our destination. It was a little scary. 6,000 GIs there. The other ships were too crowded to take us on, I would guess.
Yeah. Sleeping quarters, did you describe them, Don?
Yes, I suppose something like the Navy does, or submarines do, in these about 4 layers of canvas beds. They were placed in these luxury rooms and so on, in the dining rooms, all over, just layers and layers of GIs, about 3 feet apart. But of course, as we got southward across the equator, it had my interest in astronomy. I watched the sky too. And one of the first things I noticed was the Southern Cross. It was, that's on the Australian flag, you know. And so then I saw some other southern constellations which I wasn't familiar with myself. But I thought often of that Southern Cross, and I think it helped me carry on.
Gave you something to do. Well, where did you go? How long were you in Australia, and where did you go from there?
Well, we were in, it was interesting in Melbourne. We marched off the ships at night and there was a brownout or blackout. Yet many civilians were along the streets cheering us on. Most of the Aussie soldiers had gone to North Africa to fight Rommel, and so there weren't many there, and they figured that these Americans were here to save them because the Japanese had their eyes on Australia.
Sure.
And the people were hailed us as heroes. We looked pretty bedraggled, having been on ship for 30 days. We didn't march in order or anything.
Yeah.
They cheered us on and said, hooray for the Yanks, hooray for the Yanks. And now it just happened that most of our 70th Anti-Aircraft group were from Tennessee and rural Georgia. And they, under their voice, they said, we're not Yanks, we're rebels. And so it's kind of interesting. They called them Yanks, and we're not Yanks, we're rebels. We were there just a few days. We camped in a park, and then we were sent up to a town called Bendigo, about 50 miles north. It was an old gold mining town, perhaps 50 years earlier, say 25,000. But there they had the Victorian architecture and the fancy fountains and the statues of Queen Victoria. And it was a great experience for a Hoosier to see something as elegant as that.
Sure.
And so we were doled out 2 to a home. The Australian government paid the civilians to put us up for a week or 10 days, 2 to a house. We were in the home of Mrs. Sweeney, very nice elderly lady. Her son was in the army in Africa. So it was, we got down to earth, meeting the locals.
Uh-huh.
It was very interesting.
Yeah, that sounds interesting. Then where'd you go?
After that, we assembled, got back to Melbourne, and were shipped to New Caledonia, which is several hundred miles east of Australia, probably 50 by 200 miles in size, and the capital is Noumea, Noumea. Very beautiful island, temperate climate, and wouldn't be a bad place for a vacation.
Mm-hmm. How many were on the ship that went to New Caledonia?
There was a different ship. It was a regular Army transport, I suppose 2,000, and it was just a short trip, so it wasn't bad at all.
Was there conflict with the enemy?
No, not at all. In fact, at that time, the enemy was involved in the Philippines yet. General MacArthur was had just left the Philippines, left Battalion, and he came to Melbourne and established the base there, the Southwest Pacific. And we may have even rubbed shoulders with him, I don't know. We found out that he was in Melbourne at the time we were. Mm-hmm. And then on the way to New Caledonia, there's no problem. We and several other regiments and companies and so on of the Army, Marines, and as well as Navy people, Seabees, and Air Force were there. They built up quite an air base and a supply base for action northward. This would hopefully be as far as the Japanese would go. They never got quite to New Caledonia. And so it was very interesting in New Caledonia too. I spent about 15 months there, and felt quite fortunate to have the advantage of meeting the people. That is a French island, and the majority of the people were French descent. It had originally been a prison island, something like Australia had 100 years before.
I see.
Prisoners were shipped to New Caledonia, and perhaps a lot of these French people were descendants of those. They were very friendly, and then also on the island were some type of Melanesian people, which were called Canucks, K-N-A-K-S. And then the Siamese people who did domestic work, so on. The Canucks did manual work, and so the Army and Navy hired them for unloading ships and things of that nature. And the French authorities suggested that the Army not pay them more than 15 cents a day because it would upset the economy and the wages to which they were accustomed, and they might leave their other jobs and work for the Americans all the time.
Right. Now, you were there 15 months. Were you attacked by enemy bombers?
No, we were not. We were on a hill overlooking the harbor, a beautiful harbor, and camouflage tents and so on. And but no attacks came. I suppose it was evident to the enemy that we were building up a large force there, and the Navy was there and so on. And they never got that far. I believe it was late in '42 when the Coral Sea Battle occurred, which was just north of New Caledonia.
How far north?
Well, they got down to about 100 miles north, from 500 down to 100 miles north, and they were stopped. Now, we did see aircraft carriers come in, crippled. Some had the holes in the bow that came into our harbor. One cruiser had that problem, and some of the superstructure damaged. And there was a hospital in New Caledonia, Army hospital, and Army or Navy, and we saw quite a few Americans come in wounded and so on. The medics did do a very good job. We was always, when you were in the States, you sort of kidded the medics. You called them pill rollers, you know. They sat around, didn't do much, supposedly. But at the right time, they were there. When we were there for a while, they talked about malaria and so on. As we would be moving north, we would need something to combat that. The usual medication was in short supply, so they gave us something called Adabrin, which turned your face yellow and your eyeballs yellow and so on, and it took quite a few months to wear that off. That would occur when we moved north to a more tropical area. Now, as I said, the French people were very friendly. I had a good friend from upstate New York, one of the quietest fellows you want to know. His name was Bill War.
My goodness. And he knew some high school French, and he tried to talk to the girls, and it didn't work out that way, so we made signs and so on. But if you went to the stores and you had American money, naturally they could understand you. Yes. It made a difference, didn't it?
Yes, I still have some of the New Caledonian currency and a little bill of sale I got from one of the stores.
A question on New Caledonia, Don. Was that primarily used for our planes to take off from the airfields there to bomb enemy other places?
Yes, right.
Did you see the planes taking off?
Oh, yes, right. They were short-range bombers. I don't know just what they were. And fighters, P-38s. We saw those more later, but the P-38s were very swift pursuit ships. But the Zeros, the Japanese fighters, were lightweight, and they seemed more maneuverable. You know, they could just cut curves around these others. The others were fast, but they were more maneuverable. But evidently we went out in the end.
Anything else on New Caledonia we should tell the folks?
Yes, we had Of course, we were trying to improve relations with the French, and so some service officer, someone set up a dance to which some of the local girls were invited. Their boyfriends and husbands were in the French Army. And we had, prior to that, we had built some grass shacks to look native, I suppose, so the Japanese would know there were GIs there. And for the kitchen and other places, these, they have grass roof and some other kind of walls. And then courtesy of the Army or Navy, concrete floors. So that was to be a dance hall. I invited a lot of these girls to dance, and had a radio with music tuned to Australia. There was not much interference, radio interference, so you could reach Australia in a small radio. So I went to this particular dance, and I wasn't that outgoing, I suppose. But I saw all the other fellows ask the girls for a dance. And finally, I saw one girl sitting alone. She wasn't too good looking and was kind of quiet and so on. No one had asked her. I thought, this is no way to improve relations. I better ask her for a dance. So I did, and we danced all evening. And then nobody cut in or anything. Told her goodbye. And then later that evening, I asked the fellows, "What's wrong? Where's your courtesy?" He said, "She's the worst known prostitute in New Caledonia."
Uh-oh.
That's why they kept away from her. I didn't know any better. I felt sorry for her.
Yeah, well, I think you did the right thing.
Yes.
Okay, when did you leave New Caledonia and where'd you go?
We left about July of '43. Went to Guadalcanal, which the Marines had previously taken, and then they were moving on forward into the Solomons, and we were on Henderson Field, which was an American air base. I was surprised when I went to Guadalcanal, all the palm trees were in rows like corn. I found out that that was an Englishman's plantation. He was raising coconut palms. And so at first we resented the fact that we were protecting some English farmer, but on the other hand it was a base. And we weren't really protecting the palm trees anyway.
Right.
So we saw some action there, quite a few bombings. And, the Japanese Zeros were noted for their strange sound. You could always identify them at night. We said the motor sounded like a washing machine motor. It didn't have much power, just kind of whined. And of course, Antiaircraft at that time in the Pacific Theater, you know, actually we were behind what they were doing in Europe. We got what was left, we thought, with no radar. So we had searchlights, 800 million candle power searchlights beaming up there looking for planes at night. And then they had a large hearing device for the daytime pointed upward, and they could narrow it down to the point where the plane was. And I saw them knock down quite a few Japanese planes, and that was a more tropical place and a little more uncomfortable, but it was flooded quite a bit and so on. But we hit the foxholes quite often, and we felt very fortunate. Some of our buddies were lost, and we came through.
Was the island secure? Were there any Japanese forces left on the island when you were there?
Yes, there were. On the other side of a mountain range, there were some Japanese, and every once in a while they would come through, and we had some infantry there. And, some was it mountain artillery, a small artillery piece, or donkey artillery. Believe it or not, were there. Americans had that, and so they tried to do something about the few remaining Japanese ground forces. Mm-hmm. Incidentally, before we went to that place, Guadalcanal, orders came out to remove all insignia of rank. Officers and non-coms were to remove everything like that, because it seemed that the Japanese had the concept that if the captain or somebody was hit, the others would just run away and they'd be lost without the leader. Evidently that was the case of the Japanese. I believe they had a more kind of a group concept of fighting, Mm-hmm. They needed their leader, and where we learned from our infantry that the Americans could pretty well fight on their own, even if they lost their captain or the lieutenant.
What were you at this time?
I was buck sergeant. That's as far as I got. They said the group was full, no room for advancement. Uh-huh. So they needed me, but they said, but not enough to give me a promotion beyond buck sergeant. But
and then staff sergeant when that next.
Yeah, and yes, right. So while I was there, well, in Guadalcanal, or previously in New Caledonia, we had I felt a little sorry for these fellows from Tennessee and some of rural Georgia who were poor and uneducated. Mm-hmm. They had moved from the CCC during the Depression up to the Army, where they would mm-hmm. get $30 a month. And I tried to start a school, teach them reading, writing, and arithmetic, but lasted a week and it really didn't go over too well. They went back to the comic books. But they were really wonderful people, very loyal and good fighters. At one time, another time to amuse ourselves, the Southerners, as we call them, were very family oriented as far as we knew, and no one would fool with anybody else's girlfriend. And now if some girl would happen to get pregnant, the father would have to marry her. It was called a shotgun wedding, of course. Mm-hmm. And so some of our fellows staged a shotgun wedding. Got some big dress and so on, dressed up that way, and had a bridesmaid with flowers and so on, just put it on. I have some pictures of that. Yeah, and,
you got to have some humor in there.
Yes, that's right. And
crazy.
So you really get to know it. We had a few from the Carolinas and other places, and then some of the non-coms and officers were from New York. And you got to the point where you could almost identify American dialects within a few states. You tell the difference between North Carolina and Georgia and so on, Louisiana. But most of our group was from Tennessee and rural Georgia. Very fine group.
What was the closest shave you had, the closest that endangered your well-being?
Well, we were in Guadalcanal for about 6 or 8 months, and then we moved up to a small island in the Solomons called New Georgia. Mm-hmm. And that was kind of an advanced outpost, I guess, for intelligence. And we were gone quite a few times. Something struck within about 100 yards, and I dug down fast enough, and that was about it. One time I had to help out, I don't know what the purpose of it was, but some nitroglycerin had to be hauled to the other end of the island in a Jeep. So
which island, Don?
That was in New Georgia.
New Georgia.
Okay. And so we, then over a bumpy road, we took this load of nitroglycerin, and I guess it's liquid nitroglycerin in the small capsules, mm-hmm. Probably 100 over the bumpy road. We didn't know just how volatile it was, or whether it would take the bow up, but it didn't. And New Georgia was so damp, it rained most of the time when we were there, so we had to, we washed our own clothes, of course, and hung them inside the tent. It took about 3 days to dry. In the Pacific, as far as I knew, there were no camouflage clothes, uniforms, as you see now, all green or blue. And they did have, our underwear was in olive drab, so if you hung it outside, the enemy wouldn't spot all that white stuff and head your way.
On Guadalcanal or New Georgia, were you close enough to the sea, I'm assuming you were, to see any sea battles?
Yes, we saw some. I can't identify them. Well, just over the horizon at night, we could see the flares of the bombs, and once in a while a big burst, which evidently meant a ship was struck. And we could hear it. We could hear the sound of the bombing and the shelling. But we, outside of being bombed at our bases, we were no closer to sea battles than beyond the horizon.
Oh, during all of this time, one question I haven't asked you is if you got mail from home regularly.
Well, there was a V-mail, you know. That's a government form, and a person would write the letter on that form, and it would be photographed in 35mm film, I believe, and all the various letters, and sent home. And by the same token, those from home were sent back the same way. That started 6 months after we were overseas, and the mail usually came, took about 2 weeks, not regular, perhaps three or 4 months. My folks and other friends wrote.
Yeah. Were you kept up to date pretty well on the progress of the war in the Pacific and in Europe?
Yes. We had radio reports, and then there were mimeograph bulletins put out by the headquarters and distributed in the local areas to the batteries and headquarters areas. And we talked about the Battle of Rabaul, and what was going on in North Africa and so on. And we were pretty well kept up on that. On the various bulletins, there was no identification as to where they came from. I suppose they're thinking they get into enemy hands. Even in New Caledonia, they just called it the Barnes Bulletin, B-A-R-N-E-S. That may have been some general or something, and it would have the dues and general orders and so on.
Did you happen to just stumble onto somebody from your hometown and say, my goodness, that's so-and-so?
Yes, I certainly did. When I was at first reached New Caledonia, I located a gentleman by the name of Ed Waywood, who lived just about 6 blocks from where I did, and he had gotten into service the day after I did, and we didn't know it until we met over there.
Yeah.
And then from time to time we met others who knew, had been to our hometown. My hometown was Hammond, and they knew people we do, and it made it much easier to be away from home.
Uh-huh. Well, that's interesting, Don. Well, we're still on to Georgia right now, and we've got some more places to go, but I believe at this time we'll take a short pause. All right, we're back live now talking to Don Backe about his experiences during World War II in the South Pacific. And Don, when we broke away, we were still on New Georgia. So you want to pick us up there?
Yes, it was an interesting experience. I was in clerical work. They had typewriters in the jungle, and sometimes we wondered just how important they were. And someone sent me something Incidentally, I kept diaries during the whole period. This one got a little damaged in a storm, but that was before ballpoint pens, so that the ink did run. And someone sent me a little something which might be of interest, especially when we were trying to make the typewriters work under the conditions of high humidity. The mimeograph. I wish I had a commission in J. Caesar's Legions of Old, where the mimeograph as we know it was a story that hadn't been told. Their orders were mostly verbal. They were seldom called on to write, for most of an officer's duties were training his men to fight.
Who wrote that?
I don't know. A friend sent that to me. I corresponded with quite a few people at home when I was in service, and someone got that to me, so I put it in the diary. I had local details of my impressions. I felt very fortunate in the fact that I was generally in one position for at least several months, and I read a great deal. My former principal at the high school sent me books, and he corresponded constantly. I was interested in philosophy and things of that nature and history, and he sent them to me, as well as the local library from my hometown. I never thought a library would take that chance, but they did. They sent me books on loan, and I got them back whenever I could, and I was very gracious of them to do that. So, being in the position I was, I could make all kinds of notes and read and discuss. We had little discussion groups among our friends. Well, having reached the highest point, buck sergeant, because there's no room for going upward, of course there was some antagonism between the officers and the enlisted men and so on, but we got along well. It reminds me now of the movie and the story, James and Michener's South Pacific, Tales of the South Pacific. So I believe we were able to share some of that. When we were on the transport coming across, the Army officers were in the upper deck with the nurses, and it made us feel a little different. But anyway, when I was in New Georgia, a cruelly tropical island, I got some disease and was sent back to a hospital in New Caledonia, and those nurses did a very good job. The Army nurses were great, and there were certainly some Army officers in that tent also, but there was another section. But anyway, we felt the nurses were really good, and the same as the doctors, the medical group.
Did you, you went back to New Caledonia, to a hospital. How long were you there?
I was in the hospital for about 4 weeks, and there I did meet a nurse from my hometown, and well, nearby from Griffith, Indiana, and she was in fact a distant relative. So then I was able to end my time in New Caledonia in about August of 1944, due to the number of points. On my record it showed 3 combat area conditions, and you build up points, the time and the number of combat missions. So I was able to get back to the States. Finally, I got to the Golden Gate with some of my group in the middle of 44. So while we were in New Georgia, of course it was the low point, and people just had the feeling that the war would never end. We weren't making too much progress, and the slogan went around, the Golden Gate in 48, which would have been 5 years later. But fortunately, I believe the war was ended in August of 45, dropping the 2 bombs, and many people have said that it saved millions of Japanese and American lives. And so the slaughter ended at that point, and since then Japan has become a friend. I was stationed at Fort McPherson in Atlanta, Georgia, and there again I was in clerical work, discharging people from the Army who had been in longer than I had, and it was Atlanta at that time was a large southern city, very more southern than large, but a very interesting place. And so I got out, I was discharged myself 2 days after the war ended, and late in August of 45. So I was married, and we had 8 beautiful children.
Mm-hmm. Who was your wife?
My wife was Anna Rose McGraw. She was originally from Champaign, Illinois, and I had met her in Hammond. Our children, we had 4 boys and 4 girls.
Can you recall for us
I
the
certainly
names?
can. I better recall them. Mary Therese, Ruth Ann, Tom, Paul, Joan, Jim, John, and Helen. And those 8 children, among them I have 8 children, so I have 8 grandchildren there. And they're all scattered around the country, and from Virginia to Southern California, Wisconsin, and so on. And one of my grandchildren is married, so the others will be coming along. When I got back to Hammond, I resumed to work with my father in the insurance business. I guess it was the only thing I knew, but I enjoyed it. I liked it because it was a matter of dealing with people, mm-hmm. and making contacts. You learn how others live, and you're invited into their homes and so on. It's just a wonderful experience, and it pays too. So I thought it was better than punching a clock at a factory. And then all things developed later on, and in about 12 years ago, I moved to here in Crawfordsville. Moved to Crawfordsville. I was searching for a place in West Central Indiana, and I subscribed to several newspapers, Lafayette, Greencastle, and certain other ones. I thought perhaps I could get an idea of what they're like if I took a month's subscription. And the day-to-day events as they go on would reveal something of the people and what's going on. So I happened to receive a certain copy of the Journal Review, and I spotted an ad for the Montgomery County Historical Society and the invitation to new members. So I sent it in with about $5, and I guess the president at the time was John Bowerman. And he wrote me a long letter. He said, "We're certainly glad to have you a member. Why don't you come and visit Crawfordsville? I'll show you what it's all about." And it looked so interesting that I decided to stay.
Nice.
And I joined an insurance agency here.
Yeah, that's interesting. And your wife?
My wife is Elizabeth. She was Elizabeth Castor. She has 2 sisters and a brother. And they're old timers in the county, east of town. And she was later married to James McCarthy, an accountant. And so about 15 years ago, that there was a parting of the ways. They had 7 children, and so between us now we have 15 children. We had a merger.
Mm-hmm. How many grandchildren altogether?
15 grandchildren altogether, too, between us. 15 children and 15 grandchildren at this point. She's expecting a grandchild within a month. So
Well, that'll get you up to 15.
yes, right. Her children are all over the country too, in Boston and Chicago and other places.
Are you retired now?
Yes, I retired just a couple of months ago. I had been in business about 50 years, and I figured it was about enough. I've done a lot of reading, and about 20 years ago, as a matter of fact, I started to write a novel on Lincoln. I know there have been many stories about Lincoln. This will be, hopefully, a readable fantasy. What would have happened if Lincoln had lived? If that gun had misfired at Ford Theater. So I take it on there. For the next 4 years, he'll live through his second term. And Lincoln was quite a man who read in depth, had quite a mind, and he knew the world. Now, he happened to be a contemporary of Karl Marx, who claimed he would do so much for the poor, the ordinary people. So in one of my chapters, I'm setting up a situation, a debate between Abraham Lincoln and Karl Marx at the Crystal Palace in London, which was a large auditorium, glass covered. And so they'll debate their two ideas of what they would do for the common man. Of course, Lincoln wanted freedom and individuality, and Karl Marx wanted a group.
When is this book going to be released?
Well, I wouldn't bet on it. I have all the chapters outlined. I have the first one almost finished. So I'll certainly be happy to give you an autographed copy.
Oh, it'd be great. Yeah, it would be great.
When I got home, when I got home from the Army, I found that my mother kept something for me. Had this in the window with one star.
Little eye.
That's great.
It's a little worn and bedraggled. It had a lot of sunshine, and then after that, a little wear.
Yeah, it's 50 years old.
Yes. Incidentally, I did have a brother, 3 years older, who was in the Army too. He was in the European theater in S2, intelligence. He was in a lot of the London bombings, and later he was in France doing intelligence work, so we exchanged stories in that occasion.
Okay, a couple of more questions. Do you ever have a reunion of your outfit?
No, we haven't. After I came back to the States, the regiment was just they didn't all come back at once, and they were sort of lost, and no one contacted me, and I didn't contact them. We weren't able to get together. They weren't as tightly knit, I suppose, as some, because the regiment was broken up later into several battalions and batteries and so on.
Do you ever see any old Army buddies?
Yes, I do. I see some occasionally. I saw one from Tennessee a number of years ago, one in Milwaukee and so on. And but as an organization, he was rather loosely knit, and except when we were overseas. And then, as I said, many of the fellows went back to the South, and we just were kind of an amalgamation of groups from New York to several parts of the country. And it would be very nice if we could, but we just haven't been able to. Individually, I have seen 10, 12 of the fellows.
Good. Don, do you have anything else to show us? You've got some other books over here, and I believe one's on the floor there. If you want to get that, we'll show us what else you have.
I kept a diary daily diary from the time I was 15 till I was 25, so it kind of shows how a person changes over the years, how their observations of the world changes. And now some of the diaries were pretty badly damaged in rain and overflooded ships and so on. I put together just a few things here which indicate the day I left home. I don't know whether you come up with anything on that or not.
You might be able to hold it up like that. What do you think, Ed? Can you pick any of that up? And maybe you can leaf through and show us some other things there too.
Beneath that is a group from Houston. As I indicated, the civilians treated us very nicely. A lady there with lots of soldiers while we were in our basic training. This is the identification I got at the Martin Aircraft plant in Baltimore, and one of the searchlights which were used at that time. This is the alarm in the Swedish liner Kungsholm, which we occupied. Fire alarm instructions, abandon ship, and so on in several languages. I was able to read one. Now, Bendigo, Australia, as I indicated, was a Victorian-type town and just beautiful as far as the architecture is concerned. Now, I did have some money I'd like to show you, some currency. I got this from a friend, Philippine currency. This was used, the Philippine Islands were a commonwealth of the United States, like Puerto Rico. They were not an independent country at the time of the war. So this was their regular currency, which was issued under the direction of their head of state with the permission of the President of the United States. Now, this is currency issued by the Japanese during their occupation of the Philippines. Another one, the Japanese government, 10 centavos, and then they came out without any writing in English at all, except the top says military certificate, and these were used evidently by the civilians in the occupied Philippine Islands.
Okay. Do you have anything else, Don? You were showing me an insignia while we were
Yes.
Doing a little rehearsing here, and
Yes.
you could show the audience. I thought that was rather interesting.
As I believe I indicated, the Americal Division was formed in New Caledonia. We came over to Australia in the South Pacific as just a regiment. There were several other regiments and infantry groups and so on, but there was no division set up. So after several months in New Caledonia, it was decided by General Patch, the commander, to organize it on the basis of a division. So the heading was usually the United Forces in New Caledonia and or American Forces in New Caledonia on the stationery. So they came up with the idea of calling it the Americal Division, Americans in New Caledonia. Now, this is the patch which we received. It has the Southern shield, the blue shield with the Southern Cross, which I had mentioned earlier. I was so interested in the Southern Constellation that they use that on our patch, identification for the Americal Division. Now, Several months ago, I noticed in the U.S. News that General Colin Powell, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, just now, 49 years later, wears that same patch. So evidently at one time, General Powell was active in a division which we started in long ago in New Caledonia.
That's interesting, Don. That's really great. Okay. Don, do you have anything else to tell the folks?
Well, I would, at the start of the war, I was, I suppose, an American first person. I really didn't want to get involved, but toward the end, when it was all over, I realized that the Americans had done a lot, and they'd made the world a better place in which to live. And I would agree with Kate Smith when she says, "God bless America, land that I love."
Thank you, Don, for your interview, and thank you for what you did for America.
It's a pleasure.
Thank you.